Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Nelson, here on this very grim Wednesday afternoon, but regardless, now the popular topics on basketball today are going to be Joel Embiid returning from his injury, so that's going to be our first segment. We're going to lead with that. And then in the second segment, we're going to talk about the matchup between Victor Wembanyama and Nikola Jokic and sort of talk about like what I saw there. And then in the third segment, we're going to do a quick recap of all the NBA games, particularly talk about the Lakers and how they played. But regardless, those are going to be the three segments. We also have a fourth segment that I reveal after the end of every single third segment. So go ahead and stay in tune for that. I'm just opening up my Twitter real quick just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Yeah. Ooh. Okay, so there is news, so I'll talk about that for a little bit. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link that is displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. It is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and go into our first segment, which is talking about Joel Embiid's return to the Sixers rotation after his long wait due to injury. But actually, you know what? Before we start with that, I might as well go ahead and get into the breaking news that just happened right now. Okay, so the breaking news is that Angel Reese has recently just declared for the WNBA draft. She just announced this literally like 2, maybe 5 minutes ago, around that time. So her and Caitlin Clark, they've all declared for the WNBA draft. I'm very surprised that Caitlin declared for the WNBA draft, even with the deal around her and Ice Cube. If you guys remember, I discussed previously on the podcast that Caitlin Clark recently was offered $5 million to play in the Big Three, and it was offered by Ice Cube. So the fact that she chose the WNBA over playing in the Big Three is a little bit surprising given how much the pay difference is between WNBA athletes and the money that she was offered to play in the Big Three. So obviously, with Caitlin and Angel Reese and all those other players being able to generate revenue before even making into the WNBA, it doesn't really matter, I guess, how much she makes under her contract. And the same applies with Angel Reese. It doesn't necessarily matter what money they'll make under their contract because their name, image, and likeness is already very well known. So from the media coverage and all of her deals and all of her sponsorship deals, she's gonna end up getting the money that she deserves, more so than she's gonna get money from contracts, which is usually like endorsements are the bulk of where a lot of these athletes make their money. Not so much. Well, obviously, if you're a good player, it's going to be like you're going to make a lot more money off of your contract, especially in the men's side of sports. But I think with the revenue that Angel Reese and Caitlin are going to generate, the WNBA is going to end up making more money, and then the rest of the WNBA players will also end up making more money, and they'll end up getting much better opportunities and much more signings, and for a lot more money. And so I think this is a good move for Reese, obviously, like, to continue playing basketball and like, while her name is hot, to like keep that name, image, and likeness like going, so that way like it goes into the WNBA, and that way you get the advertisements, you get the sponsorships, and everything that comes with it. So good move all around. And she also got lucky that Caitlin also declared for the WNBA, because most people are going to want to see another rematch between Caitlin and Angel Reese, like how it is in LSU and Iowa and how they were the last 2 years. So, but with that out of the way, we can talk about Joel Embiid and his return to the Sixers. So the Sixers ended up winning last night against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Very important win for the Sixers to capitalize on Joel Embiid returning, and definitely not something that the Thunder wanted to happen, and that was losing this game. Now, they didn't have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for this game, so that might be the bulk of the reason why the Thunder ended up losing, because they didn't have their best player. Even though, like, Chet Holmgren, he ended the game with 22 points and 7 rebounds, but obviously that wasn't enough to stop the Sixers with Joel Embiid. I honestly don't even know if that would be enough to stop the Sixers without Joel Embiid, because the amount of points that they scored with Embiid, it wasn't that much more than the amount of points they'd score without Embiid. But obviously, with this being Embiid's first game back, he has to get used to playing like live games again, and who knows how long that will take. But Joel Embiid ended the game with 24 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds, and 3 steals. So overall, a really decent performance coming in from Embiid in his return. Obviously, we're really used to Joel Embiid dropping way more points than just 24, and he ended up taking 12 free throws as well. So half of Joel Embiid's points came from the line, and the other half came from scoring like straight from the field. But he shot 6 of 14 from the field, so if he didn't get to the line as nearly as often as he did, he would have been the cause and the reason why the Sixers ended up losing. But he did end up going to the line, and I really think that play style, it's going to be a problem going into the playoffs, constantly foul hunting, because the refs, especially now and recently, to where the refs have been are starting to get a lot more lenient on the foul calls and what they call a foul recently. Like, I saw a report that the amount of free throws, the average amount of free throws that teams shot in this previous month was the lowest in NBA history. And we always, a lot of people on Twitter were quick to joke about it, saying, it's because Joel Embiid isn't playing, it's because Joel Embiid isn't playing. And that sentiment, like, while it holds some fact that, yes, Joel Embiid isn't playing, that is like a very big deal for the NBA. The fact that they're secretly trying to cut down on the amount of foul calls that are called in the NBA, because there are a lot of ridiculous calls that the officials make, and most of them do come from Joel Embiid. But regardless, if you're a superstar or like if you're the franchise player, you're going to get calls more often than you're not going to get calls. And the fact that the Lakers... Wow, okay, that's a weird noise that the microphone's making. But hold on just one second. What is that? Okay, I have no idea what that was, but it finally stopped. But okay, maybe just don't do that again, microphone. My bad for those audio issues. I have no idea what that was or why it made that noise. But regardless, like, again, the Sixers, Joel Embiid's play style, it's very reliant on the free throw. And with these refs being a little more loose with these foul calls that they're calling, it might have been a really bad time for Joel Embiid to return, and it might not translate well going into the postseason. And even with like the postseason like in mind, it's like I don't understand why Joel Embiid, like, they needed to force a return now. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, because it's like the Sixers, they dropped all the way down from I didn't even think they were going to make the playoffs, like or make it deep in the playoffs to begin with, when Joel Embiid was having his MVP caliber season, and now they're expected to go into the playoffs as a lower seed and play tough games immediately. Like, I'm not entirely sure how this is going to play out for the Sixers, and I'm very surprised that they ended up bringing Joel Embiid back, especially after like his really serious injury. Now, it was a meniscus injury, and this is the same injury that Karl-Anthony Towns went down with later on in the season. So, wonder if they're thinking of bringing back Karl-Anthony Towns for the playoffs. But Regardless, this was a very important win for the Sixers, and they needed this win to sort of like start winning, and maybe if they continue to win, they can make their way all the way back up to playoff contention and make that 6th seed, so that way they don't have to play in these play-in games. Now, there's a 2-game difference between the Sixers and the Pacers, so with that 2-game difference, there's a huge possibility that they might end up stealing that spot if the Sixers end up winning and the Pacers end up losing. But looking at the schedule for the Sixers, they play the Heat tomorrow, then they play Memphis, then they play San Antonio, then they play Detroit, then they play Orlando, and then they play the Nets. So out of all of those teams, I think they should only be worried about the Heat and the Magic. Other than that, I feel like they could win all those games relatively easily. And as for the Pacers, their final games are going to be against Brooklyn tonight, against the Thunder, against the Heat, against the Raptors, then against the Cavs, and then after the Cavs, they play the Hawks. So with that in mind, the Pacers' schedule is a lot more difficult than the Sixers' schedule. So it will be a lot easier for the Sixers to win their games than the Pacers will win their games. And that could determine playoff standings. Like, again, we'll have to see like how these teams play in the end, but if the Pacers end up losing a lot more, they could end up falling all the way down to the play-in, and that's going to be a serious problem for this team. And that's something that they thought they were going to avoid once Joel Embiid went out with the injury. And not only that, they also have to worry about both of those teams have to worry about the Miami Heat ending up coming out of the playoffs and winning and taking the 6th seed, because the Heat, like, while I do say that they don't deserve to be that high in the power rankings, they are the 7th seed and they are a threat to both the Sixers and the Pacers in stealing the 6th seed. Now, the Heat, their opponents are going to be the Sixers, Houston, the Pacers, the Hawks, the Mavs, the Raptors, and then the Raptors again. So, little bit of compared to the rest of those guys, I feel like the teams that they really need to worry about are the Pacers, the Sixers, and the Mavericks. But that is like they're like the second easiest. I think the Pacers schedule is a little bit more difficult, but the Sixers schedule is a bit easier than the Heat schedule. So we will have to see like just how this plays out. But this could also, like, obviously, like, this will affect, like, the playoff teams that they're going to end up playing going into the postseason. And those playoff teams they could either play the Celtics, the Bucks, or the Cavs. And I feel like the Cavs are going to be that's the team that you'd want to play if you're either Philly, the Pacers, or the Miami Heat. And that's sort of the team that you should really shoot for into playing. But with that, we are out of time for this first segment. Let me know what you guys think of Joel Embiid returning. You think that he'll end up playing the entirety of the postseason, or do you think he's going to sit out some games like he usually does? But let me know what you guys think of this in the comments. But we are out of time. So in the second segment, I'm going to talk about the matchup between Jokic and Victor Wembanyama. So stay tuned for that after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we're going to be talking about the matchup between Jokic and Victor Wembanyama. So before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and talk about the matchup between Jokic and the matchup between Victor Wembanyama. So obviously, these two players are some of the best players in the league, arguably the top four centers in the league. Yes, I do think Victor Wembanyama is top four. I just don't see any center doing what he's doing, and he's only a rookie, so he can only get better as time goes on, or like we can only assume that he's going to get better, especially with his length and his ability on the offensive side of the ball. Because one thing that makes both of them like so impressive to watch is just how much they could fill up the stat sheet and how often they fill up the stat sheet. Because Victor, like being so tall, like obviously he's going to be able to get every single rebound over every other player given the height difference and the length difference. But not only that, he's also able to get blocks very, very well, as he showed in this previous game. And he's also been able to get a lot of good steals because of his length. And because he's been able to get so many blocks, he averages 3.4 in the season, and he already has more blocks than the last three Defensive Player of the Years combined. So, which is a crazy stat for a rookie to accomplish. And with this in mind, it really shows like how dangerous like the Spurs are going to be over time. He ended the game with 23 points, 15 rebounds, 8 assists, and 9 blocks. So he was just 1 block away and 2 assists away from getting a quadruple double as a rookie. And this is a stat that not many players in the NBA can accumulate. Now, obviously, like, there are certain players who could, and like with how talented the league is, there's been like a growth of those amount of players. But 9 times out of 10, no one's going to really get close to dropping a quadruple double, let alone as close as Wembanyama was, and especially as a rookie. Like, the only players in the league that I think could get a triple-double are, a quadruple-double are Jokic and Victor and LeBron, and players that essentially could do everything on the court. And there's not really that many players that could do that, both offensively and defensively. And that's what makes Victor Wembanyama just that much more valuable, because not only is he a value for the offensive side of the ball as a rookie, but he's also tremendously valuable on the defensive side with his length and his presence constantly affecting players at the rim. Now, Victor wasn't the only center to play last night, but he was getting most of the media coverage from last night. He always seems to get more media coverage, but I'm surprised he got more coverage than Jokic did coming into this night, because Jokic, he ended up finishing with 42 points and 16 rebounds. So obviously, like, he did outplay Victor in this game, and he didn't shoot that well from three, shot 1 for 6 from three, but it doesn't really matter. He ended the game with 42 points. I don't know what more you could ask from your MVP. And yes, I do think that Jokic is going to win the MVP this season, regardless of how well Luka Doncic is playing. I definitely think that Jokic is, like, what he's done throughout the season and leading the Denver Nuggets to the 1 seed. I feel like that's much more impressive than what Luka Doncic is doing, while he's leading the Mavericks to, like, the 6th seed at the moment, or the 5th seed, depending on, like, how much they flip-flopped between these previous games, because, you know, the rankings, they always change when you're in the Western Conference. So right now they're the 5th seed, and they look to be playing the Clippers in the first round. So that's going to be an interesting matchup for the first round. The Mavericks going up against the Clippers yet again. It seems like they always match up against each other in the playoffs. And that could be bad news for Luka, honestly. But back to the matchup at hand. The final score was 110-105. The Nuggets ended up winning. Obviously, like the Spurs, they were already eliminated from playoff contention, so there's no real hope coming in from them. And the Nuggets, they increased their win total, and they continue to hold that 1 seed. They are tied in the 1 seed between I think they're tied between the Timberwolves, and that's about it. No, they're about to be tied with the Timberwolves and the Thunder, because right now the game difference is 0.5 between the 1, 2, and 3 seed. So the Timberwolves have 1 less game played than the Nuggets, and so do the Thunder. So there's a possibility that the Nuggets might not even make the 1 seed, and they might make the 3rd seed. Again, the race is still relatively close, so we'll see how things go in that department. But now, obviously, both of these centers are relatively young. They're, like, even though Jokic, like, we've seen his dominance for a while in this league, he's still a relatively young player, and he still has a lot more time in this league. So I don't think this game wouldn't be considered, like, a passing of the torch, in the sense that, like, Jokic is going to, like, stop playing after the season, but it might be considered a passing of the torch later on as the year progresses, or, like, as the rest of the NBA seasons go on, because maybe Jokic will not win the MVP anymore, and the MVP will go to a different center, Victor, or something of that nature. Now, obviously, it's a little bit too early to say that Victor is going to win the MVP, but with how he's progressed and how he's been playing, it's really a crime not to, because, like, if he's not, like, already the Rookie of the Year, I don't know what your problem is. Like, if you don't think that Victor already won Rookie of the Year, there's something wrong, because he's already proven that he is the best rookie to come out of that class. He's already proven that he's better than Chet, given how they matched up against each other. He's already proven that he's better than the rest of the class that got drafted along with him, and he's lived up to the hype that the media put on him since day one. So with that in mind, I don't understand why he wouldn't be the Rookie of the Year, and I also don't understand why he wouldn't be the Rookie of the Year unanimously. Like, I feel like he should be the rookie to win it unanimously. And LeBron didn't win Rookie of the Year unanimously. I'm not entirely sure if there's ever even been a Rookie of the Year that won it unanimously. I'm going to go ahead and check right now. Here. Because usually there's only been one MVP who has won it unanimously, and that was Stephen Curry. So, Okay, so 5 players have won the Rookie of the Year unanimously. Ralph Sampson, David Robinson, Blake Griffin, Damian Lillard, and Karl Anthony Towns. So if he does this, he'll join that list of players to win Rookie of the Year unanimously. And he'll also join David Robinson again in that list. And it's kind of ironic how Victor Wembanyama is already on a bunch of lists with Tim Duncan and David Robinson, given how all 3 of them are big men, and all 3 of them were drafted first overall, and all 3 of them have played for the San Antonio Spurs. And when you take all of that into account, they share like a lot of similarities between each other. There's a lot of like parallels that you can draw with their careers. And like for example, David Robinson, he was one of the few players in the NBA to get a quadruple double, and he was also one of the few players to score 70 points in a game. Meanwhile, you could also look at Tim Duncan, how he was one of the only few players to almost get a triple double with blocks, and he almost got a quadruple double with those blocks as well. And you look at Victor Wembanyama and his height, and it's like he could definitely do all of the things that those centers have done before him, if not better, with how much more they're getting the ball. Because Tim Duncan and like David Robinson, it could be argued that they were both system players, because the Spurs team as a whole, when they were playing, were really good, and they played within the system. But now, with how offenses operate in today's NBA, there's a chance that Victor Wembanyama could be the system. And with one individual player, with one player constantly having the ball in their hands, it allows them to accumulate better stats. And with those better stats, like obviously they're going to break a lot more records because they're accumulating much more stats. And that's something that we could see Victor do that we haven't seen any of those other centers do. So the trajectory for Victor and his ceiling is much, much higher than the ceiling that Tim Duncan has already set. And that could be good for a player, but that could also be bad, because one of the things that the best way to compare the type of hype and media coverage that Victor is getting is to compare it to LeBron's hype and media coverage. Because LeBron, when he was going into the league, he was thought of as the next Michael Jordan, and he was the next sort of chosen one for the NBA. And with that hype came a lot of expectations. Now, lucky for LeBron, he was able to not only meet those expectations, but ultimately surpass them and become the best player that the league has ever seen. So that sort of same expectation is being put on Victor right now. And it could make or break a player, and it's all dependent on how the player handles the media, and it's all dependent on how the player handles himself. And we don't give enough credit to LeBron for doing that. And we make it seem like it's this easy thing that every NBA player can do, but it's really not. So we're going to see if Victor Wembanyama is made out of that same stuff that LeBron is made out of. But with that, we are out of time for this second segment. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the third segment, where I give a quick recap of all the NBA games that went down from last night. Starting with the Lakers, since we are talking about LeBron and them beating the Raptors. So again, I will be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we're going to be doing a quick recap of all the NBA games that went down last night, starting with the Lakers going up against the Raptors. So the Lakers beat the Raptors 128-111. Obviously, this Raptors team has sort of been tanking since losing Scottie Barnes, so there's no hope for them to make the playoffs right now. They got eliminated a while ago. If I'm just going to check the standings just to make sure. Yeah, there's no way that they're going to be able to make the playoffs with the record that they have right now, even if they win out. So again, like, it makes sense that they're tanking so that way, like, they can get that draft pick. They are in the 12th seed, however, so it's in that weird, like, middle area where it's like, again, you're losing a lot of games, but you're also winning enough games so that way it prevents those players, or it prevents the team from getting a much higher draft pick than they would normally get. Because to start the season, like, with Scottie Barnes, they definitely expected a lot more coming out of this roster, but regardless, like, things happen, and Scottie Barnes, he led the Raptors in every single statistical category, from points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks, and he was the only player in the league doing that for his team. So obviously, like, them losing Scottie Barnes ultimately caused them to lose the season. And the Lakers right now, they're 10 games positive, so I did not expect the Lakers to be 10 games positive, and they're slowly creeping up to that 8th seed. Now, if they get to the 8th seed, that would mean they only have to play once in the play-in, and then they can make the playoffs as the 7th seed, which would be a much better option for them, unless the Nuggets end up falling down to the 2nd seed. Because if the Nuggets fall down to the 2nd seed, I think that's when the Lakers' journey ends. And I see the Lakers being able to beat the Timberwolves and the Thunder, especially the Thunder with their lack of experience. But I do not see the Lakers beating the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets ended up sweeping the Lakers last year. And even though, like, it could be argued that the Lakers, they got better overall as a team, I don't think, like, the Nuggets are afraid of the Lakers as much as, like, the Thunder are afraid of the Lakers, because the Lakers have beaten the Thunder in the regular season a couple times. So I feel like that is the matchup that they're trying to avoid, going up against the Nuggets, and it seems like the Nuggets are going to keep that 1 seed. So if things stay the way that they are right now and the Lakers move up to the 8th seed, there's a chance that they might not end up playing them if they could end up beating the Kings in the play-in. But looking at the box scores, D'Angelo Russell ended the game with 25 points and 7 assists. LeBron James ended the game with 23 points and 9 assists. Anthony Davis ended the game with 21 points and 12 rebounds. And Roy Hachimura ended the game with 14 points. And there was also Max Christie, who ended the game with 12 points. So overall, really solid production as a team coming in from the Lakers, which is what this team needs going into the playoffs. LeBron James shot 10 for 12 from the field. He's been shooting much more efficiently from the field. He also, for the first time, he's averaging a much better three-point percentage than Stephen Curry. And it's not by 0.1%, it's by a whole percent. And obviously, with, like, the reputation of LeBron being a finisher around the rim more so than a shooter, compared to Steph Curry's image being more of a shooter, this is very impressive given how LeBron is doing this as the oldest player in the NBA. And, like, a lot of people don't really talk about that, but I feel like that's something that should be added onto his legacy, because shooting better than the greatest shooter that the league has seen while you're the oldest player in the NBA, it's almost unheard of. And with this win, the Lakers, like, they continue their winning streak, and I believe it's the Mavericks that held their highest winning streak, but they ended up, speaking of the Mavericks, they ended up losing to the Golden State Warriors 104-100. So we'll move on to that game right now. And the Warriors, they ended the game with Steph Curry only scoring 13 points. So the fact that they were able to win with Curry scoring that few, like, such a low scoring game coming in from him, it definitely is something positive for this Warriors team because it shows that they're a lot deeper than their star player. And when their star player has a bad game, they can still find a way to win it in the end, especially against a competitive team like the Dallas Mavericks. Excuse me. So Andrew Wiggins ended the game with 23 points. Chris Paul ended the game with 14 points and shot 6 for 11. Klay Thompson also ended the game with 14 points, 2 for 8 from 3. And Steph Curry, again, 13 points. Not a high-scoring game from Steph, but he didn't really need the scoring because the rest of the team ended up providing the points for him. So he got very lucky there that his performance didn't end up costing them. And Luka Doncic, he ended the game with 30 points, 11 assists, and 12 rebounds. So another triple-double coming in from Doncic. And there's a chance that he could end up stealing the MVP from Jokic. Again, there's a chance. I don't think that that's what's going to happen as the season unfolds, but we'll see going on into the rest of going on into the offseason and going on to when the award show happens. But we will see. Kyrie Irving ended the game with 27 points, had 3 steals, and didn't really get many rebounds or assists, but he did provide in terms of scoring. PJ Washington ended the game with 20 points and 5 rebounds. Daniel Gafford ended the game with 10 points and 8 rebounds. And again, that was really it in terms of scoring for the Dallas Mavericks. So there was a lot more people scoring on the Warriors than there were for the Mavericks. I mentioned earlier that I mentioned in a previous podcast that the lowest that the Golden State Warriors could go is losing out of the play-in and losing that spot to Houston. That's definitely like their lowest point. But so far, with the wins that they've been able to get, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Again, we'll see. There's still a few more games left in the regular season, so we will see just how the standings play out towards the end of the season. And for Dallas, I did say that their lowest point would be dropping all the way to the play-in and needing to play a couple of play-in games. But even when they do play those play-in games, I think the only team that they'd have to worry about is playing the Denver Nuggets. Because, again, I think the Mavericks are a good enough team to beat the Timberwolves. And, well, not the Timberwolves, but I think they're good enough to beat the Thunder because of the Thunder's lack of experience. So I feel like that's the matchup that if any team that's in that low-seeded area wants to go up against any team that's in the high-seeded area, it's the Thunder. And with that in mind, it's like right now the Dallas Mavericks, like, they are in the playoffs and they do hold that like 5th seed. So they might not get that low to where they need to play those games, but regardless, as a 5th seed, it looks like they could play the Clippers. And I really don't think that's something that the Mavericks want to do in the first round, because if history repeats itself, then Luka Doncic is just going to lose to the Clippers yet again. Even though Luka Doncic, he plays very well against the Clippers, he never ends up winning the series in the end. And that's something that a lot of people forget. And that could cost them. So that could be like their high point, just staying in the playoffs and then losing to the Clippers in the first round. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens to the Mavericks whatsoever. Now, the Heat, they ended up playing the Knicks last night. They ended up winning 109-99. So I guess I was a little bit wrong for saying that the Miami Heat don't deserve to be in that top 11 spot, because they ended up beating the Knicks, who were ranked just above them. Now, Josh Hart, he ended the game with only 2 points despite playing 46 minutes, so that didn't help much for the Knicks whatsoever. Miles McBride ended the game with 24 points. He also played 45 minutes, which is, again, a lot of minutes to stack onto one player. Jalen Brunson ended the game with 20 points and 10 assists, and DiVincenzo ended the game with 31 points. So the scoring, like, it was pretty evenly distributed in the starting lineup, apart from Josh Hart and Isaiah Hartenstein, who ended with 4 points. But regardless, like, this was still a performance that needed improvement because of how the Knicks were shooting tonight. They ended up shooting 12 for 34 from 3. That's not going to be efficient enough to, like, to expect it to make it out of the first round. They need to be a lot better at shooting that three-pointer. And the Miami Heat, they had Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, but they weren't even the leading scorer. Terry Rozier ended the game with 34 points, and Jimmy Butler ended the game with 17 points. Bam Adebayo ended the game with 15 points and 9 rebounds. And that was the only scoring coming in from the Miami Heat. So Terry Rozier's performance ultimately carried the Miami Heat to this win, and it's really something that the Knicks can't afford. If it was Jimmy Butler, sure, because like it's a little bit more understandable, but Terry Rozier being able to score that many points on you is just not okay. And if he didn't score that many points, then chances are the Knicks would have probably come out winning this game. And it's going to cost them, because if this Miami Heat team, they can get hot at any second. So I know I continue to be harsh on them, but the reason why I am harsh is because they haven't gotten hot yet. And this win over the Knicks, it might be what the Miami Heat need to sort of get it going. And you don't want the Miami Heat to get going, because then they become a threat to everyone in the playoffs. So that's something that needs to be that should be a little bit concerning if you are the New York Knicks, especially since there is a chance that you could see them in the playoffs, assuming they end up playing the Bucks in the first round and they end up winning against the Bucks in the first round. So that's their ceiling for them is going to be making it to the Eastern Conference Finals. I think that's the Miami Heat's ceiling. They've done it previously, they've done it more times in the recent years than any other team has. And their low point would be losing in the play-in. And they could do both. They could do either or, and I wouldn't be surprised with how the team has been. So those are my opinions on both of those teams. The next game on this list is the Bucks going up against the Wizards. Now, the Wizards, they ended up beating the Bucks 117-113, and obviously, when you're the Bucks, losing to this really bad team this late in the season, it's not something that you want heading into the postseason, because this could carry over. Obviously, they won't see each other in the playoffs, neither of these teams, but losing to a relatively bad team when you're the Bucks, the second seed, it's not a good look. And it really it gives teams sort of the thought that, oh, we can definitely beat these guys because that team is bad and they just lost to them. We're definitely better than that team. So looking at the box scores, Denny Avdija, excuse me if I botched that last name, ended the game with 23 points. Corey Kispert ended the game with 27 points. Jordan Poole found his way back into the starting lineup. I didn't really talk about it because, there's nothing much that needs to be talked about. Jordan Poole, when he was coming off the bench, he was playing a lot better than when he was starting. So he ended up retaking that starting position because he was playing better. But in this game, he ended with 16 points and 13 assists. So he was really good passing the ball this game, but in terms of scoring, he was not good, which is honestly, I would say it's surprising, but it's really not that surprising because he's had these type of scoring lows pretty often as a Wizard. So, and then Jared Butler ended the game with 17 points, 7 of 10 from the field. And that was really the only scoring coming in from the Wizards, and that was the only scoring that they really needed because the Bucks, they still seem slow and they still look like they need to figure things out. And ironically, while I say that Damian Lillard is low-key the cause of these losses, he's also somewhat responsible for their wins because the Bucks, they've only won one game without Damian Lillard in the rotation, and in this game right here, they ended up losing without Damian Lillard playing. Giannis ended the game with 35 points, 15 rebounds, and 10 assists. So great scoring game coming in from Giannis. Chris Middleton ended the game with 24 points, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists. And that was the only scoring, the only real scores in the starting lineup. Malik Beasley ended the game with 5 points. Brook Lopez ended the game with 6. And Patrick Beverley ended the game with 2. So not really much help coming in from the rest of the Bucks. as like they needed Damian Lillard scoring, and I feel like if they had Damian Lillard scoring in this game, they would have ended up coming out on top. So they still need to figure it out as a team, because it can't be that like if you have Dame, you have a higher chance of winning, but when Dame plays, like there's a chance that you could lose as well. Like Dame doesn't really it doesn't feel like he brings a drastic difference to their offense. But when he goes out, then you see that drastic difference. And it's like, I don't think that that's how it should be. I feel like Dame should have these dominant performances while Giannis is playing. And it would definitely like boost the rest of the team's morale if he's playing well, which he doesn't usually play that well or as good as we see him when he's playing with Giannis, even though the Bucks have only won one game without Damian Lillard. And it's very odd. Like, it puts them in a very odd spot for me. But those are just my opinions on the Bucks. You already know that I see them like they could either make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, or they could lose in the first round to the Miami Heat. Those are like the two outcomes. Like those are the high points, and that's the low point for the Bucks. If they lose to the Heat again, especially like after getting Damian Lillard, because if you guys remember like all the offseason drama, Damian Lillard was expected to sign with the Miami Heat, or not sign, but it was expected to be received in a trade, and the fact that he went to the Bucks, the Miami Heat sort of felt cheated, and it's the reason why Jimmy Butler, he had that emo hairstyle that we see on his mugshot for his player profile, not his mugshot, his player profile. My bad, but it would be very embarrassing if the Heat end up beating the Bucks with Damian Lillard. It would be very, very embarrassing for that team. Now, the next game on this list is the Timberwolves going up against the Houston Rockets. Now, Houston, they were on an 11-game winning streak, but now they sort of cooled off, and they cooled off at a very bad time because they are fighting for that play-in spot, and now the Warriors are winning games. So there might be a chance that they end up missing the play-in spot entirely with how they've been playing recently. Now, the Timberwolves, they ended up winning 113-106, and they've been playing really well without Karl Anthony Towns. Rudy Gobert ended the game with 12 points and 14 rebounds. Anthony Edwards ended the game with 21 points. And Naz Reid ended the game with 25 points. And there was not really much scoring coming in from Houston. Jalen Green ended the game with 26 points. Fred VanVleet ended the game with 22 points. And Jabari Smith Jr. ended the game with 18 points. Again, those were like really the only scorers coming in from Houston. So their lack of scoring from the rest of the lineups and the rotation was the big reason why they ended up losing this game. And they really needed this win to sort of like keep their hopes alive, in my opinion. But we'll see how the season plays out. Again, like there's still a couple of games for them. They could make it up. The Cavs ended up playing the Jazz. They ended up winning 129-113. Not really much that needs to be said about this game. They did not have Donovan Mitchell in the lineup yet again. I don't understand what is his problem. He was in the lineup last game, and now he's not in the lineup for this game. But the team ended up winning, so I guess it doesn't really matter. A win is a win. And Evan Mobley ended the game with 21 points. Garland ended the game with 8 points. He's been very slow recently. Like, he hasn't really been scoring the ball as often as we usually are accustomed to him doing. Jarrett Allen ended the game with 21 points and 12 rebounds. And Karis LeVert ended the game with 26 points. So, obviously, like, this was a very good performance coming in from the Cavs and a very good overall team win for them and something that they desperately needed. And the last game on this list is the Kings going up against the Clippers. And the Kings ended up winning 109-95. So big win for the Kings as they needed it to sort of avoid that play-in spot, which it looks like they're the 7th seed right now. So despite the fact that they are like in the 7th seed, they should still be worried about losing to either Phoenix or the Lakers, because I could see them losing to either of those teams. I don't really see them losing to Golden State now, even though they did lose to them the previous year. So their lowest point would be to lose in the play-in to either of those teams, and then their highest point is to just, lose in the first round to Denver, because I think while they do have the matchups for Denver, I think Denver's matchups are just ultimately better. I mean, excuse me, hiccups, but Jokic and Sabonis, I think Jokic is going to win that matchup. And then Jamal Murray against De'Aaron Fox, it's a little bit of more of a toss-up, but I think Jamal Murray is going to end up winning that matchup given how he's played. Now, the Clippers, they didn't play well at all in this game, and this is usually around the time where the Clippers start playing bad, and it's like they have that playoff reputation where it's like whatever can go wrong will go wrong, and it looks like it's hitting them early, and I don't think that's something that this team could afford. They were talked about as being one of the favorites, and now it's like there's a chance that they might not even make it out of the first round, and that's really a scary sight. But they do play the Dallas Mavericks in the first round, so maybe they'll get lucky because they always beat the Mavericks for some reason. But with that, we are out of time, and that is capping off the NBA review. So tune in for the fourth segment where I talk about Vince Carter and Chauncey Billups making it into the Hall of Fame and my overall thoughts on that. So I will be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back to the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we're going to be talking about Vince Carter and Chauncey Billups making it into or being eligible to be in the next the next Hall of Fame class, But this news was announced about an hour ago where Vince Carter and Chauncey Billups were going to be first ballots on the Hall of Fame, and it's very well deserved for both of these players. And while Vince Carter, he didn't really win anything as an NBA player. I believe he won as an Olympic athlete while he was playing for Team USA. And Chauncey Billups, he won a championship with the Detroit Pistons. So obviously, both of these players, it seems like they're well deserved to be in the Hall of Fame. And unlike the other Hall of Fames, like the Football Hall of Fame, there's in the Football Hall of Fame, there's not really a requirement in order to be considered as a Hall of Famer. But in the NBA, there seems like there's a lot more of a criteria than the NFL, where you have to have a certain amount. If you play in the NBA, you have to have a certain amount of All-Star game appearances. You have to have a certain amount of championships won. You also, being an Olympic athlete, it definitely helps your chances of making it into the Hall of Fame, because one thing that a lot of people forget is that it's not the NBA Hall of Fame, it's Basketball Hall of Fame. And the Olympics, they count as basketball games. So, and a lot of people, they sort of forget that when they're talking about who should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Because, now that these guys were retired into the Hall of Fame, I'm actually very surprised that Carmelo Anthony hasn't been selected in that same Hall of Fame class. Melo should be a first ballot Hall of Famer without a doubt, given what he's done for Team USA. And a lot of people forget that, because when they talk about Carmelo Anthony, the only thing that they bring up is oh, he didn't win anything in the NBA, so he doesn't really deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But he won as an Olympic athlete, and that's also a big reason why Manu Ginobili ended up making the Hall of Fame, because Manu Ginobili on the Spurs, while he was a very important player on the Spurs, he was primarily a sixth man, and he was primarily either a third or a fourth option for the team. Yet he made the Hall of Fame. And it's not because of his ring count, even though that definitely helps. It's because of his Olympic career and what he did for the Argentinian team. And all that stuff, it gets taken into account when you're looking for validity to be in the Basketball Hall of Fame, because there are a lot of foreign basketball players who are in the Basketball Hall of Fame that never even played in the NBA. And that's sort of like the reason why these players, well, specifically Vince Carter, ended up making the Hall of Fame. It was what he did outside of the NBA and what he did as an Olympic athlete. Because if you guys remember, Vince Carter, like, he jumped over a 7-footer just to dunk on them in the Olympics. And being labeled as the best dunker that the NBA has ever seen, obviously, like, that should be enough. That should be enough for you to be considered worthy enough to enter the Hall of Fame. Like, it doesn't even matter what you do for the rest of if you don't win or win, like, being labeled as the best dunker is enough for you to join the Hall of Fame. So Vince Carter had that under his belt. And Chauncey Billups, he had the championship under his belt with the Detroit Pistons beating the Lakers in that finals. Like, obviously, Chauncey Billups, he's one of the best point guards that the league has seen, and he was arguably like the last good point guard for Detroit until or the last good guard up until Cade Cunningham ended up joining in. But again, this team, well, not the team, but these two players, they definitely they do deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. And my big question is, when is Melo going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame? Because I feel like he deserves to be inducted way more than either of those players. Way more than Vince Carter, at least. Just because, I feel like being a 3-time Olympic gold medalist is much more of an accomplishment than being known as the NBA's best dunker. And while, yes, Vince Carter, his dunks are ridiculous, and what he did, literally being called Air Canada, the rest of his career, it's also taken into account, and he didn't generate nearly as much success as Carmelo Anthony did, not just on the Olympic standpoint, but also from a college standpoint, because Carmelo Anthony, he won an NCAA tournament with Syracuse, and he won a men's basketball championship with Syracuse. So that's another championship accolade that Carmelo Anthony has over Vince Carter. And with all that in mind, I feel like Carmelo deserves to be in the Hall of Fame way more than Vince Carter. At least Vince Carter. I can totally understand why Chauncey gets selected to be in the Hall of Fame over Carmelo Anthony because of that championship ring that he has. And it's sort of something that depending on especially since he won the finals MVP, depending on how valuable you are for a championship team, it could ultimately determine whether or not you're going to be in the Hall of Fame or not. But there's not really any other accolades that those players have that could determine them to making the Hall of Fame. They don't have MVPs. They don't have obviously there's only one person among all of them that has won a finals MVP or an NBA championship. They don't have a defensive player of the year. So the rest of their accolades are sort of counting accolades in terms of all-star selections, and it's NBA first teams, NBA second teams, those type of selections. And usually to be in the Hall of Fame, you need some type of hardware, or you need some proof that you've won at least on some level of competitive basketball. And I feel like Melo, he has a lot more of that than Vince Carter, even though Vince Carter is he's considered a little bit more iconic because he is Air Canada and he is the best dunker that the league has seen. And Melo, I feel like Melo gets a lot of hate from a lot of media coverages and a lot of NBA fans who aren't Knicks fans, just because of his play style and how he's a little bit more of a scorer and doesn't really like passing the ball. Because that was the stipulation around Melo's career. He would rather settle for a contested jumper than give the ball to someone else. And that's sort of hurt his career. And another accolade that he has that isn't really mentioned is that he started the most consecutive games than any NBA player ever. Up until the first time he ever got benched and didn't start was with the Houston Rockets. And that was in the later half of his career where he started to get on that decline. And even after that, he started considerable amount of minutes for the Portland Trailblazers, and he ended up staying in that starting rotation for a while. So the fact that that doesn't get talked about much is a little bit annoying as someone who's like a fan of Melo, but I digress. So those are my opinions on, like, I do think that those Hall of Fame, like, those players, like, they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. Like, I'm not saying this because I don't think Vince Carter should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm saying this because if Vince Carter's in the Hall of Fame, then Carmelo Anthony should be in the Hall of Fame and in that same inductee class, because there's no reason why he shouldn't. He's already a retired player, and he's already, like, proven himself as one of the league's best scorers, and he's already proven himself as one of the Team USA's best Olympic athletes. So I see no reason for him to make the Hall of Fame at the same time that these two players make. But that's just me, and with that, that is the end of the show segment, and that is the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And before I end off this segment, I'd like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. It is displayed below the ticker on every show segment, as you could see. And that is the end of the show. Thank you once again. I am your host, Nelson. And as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.